Good morning, community. Welcome to another episode of Keeping It Real with Dr. Anita. I am your host, Dr. Anita Polite Wilson. And today, for our lived experiences conversation, I am thrilled to have with me my podcast engineer, Mr. Brian Colburn of Sitch Radio. Good morning, Brian. How are you today?
I am wonderful. It's great to be with you.
Thank you so much for carving out some time in your schedule. I know that you have a lot of shows that you do, and today's a special day. As we are recording, we are commemorating the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And Brian, I don't know about you, but I'm thinking about the unity and community that was developed after that tragedy when Americans put everything aside to do what needed to be done to heal our nation. And in this current pandemic, I'm hoping that we can see that same spirit of unity and community again. What about you?
Most definitely. I've had the fortunate opportunity to work on some 9/11 commemorative pieces
Hmm.
for another show. And one thing that resonated through all of them is they stated that it was Americans helping Americans.
Mhm.
It didn't matter what race, religion, color, class. It was just, nobody wants another 9/11, but everybody would love another 9/12. And
Right.
I didn't say that. That's not my saying, but
Yeah.
I've heard it said, and they're absolutely right.
And that's a beautiful way to think about how far we've come since then. Absolutely. No one wants another 9/11. Absolutely. We want to get out of this pandemic. But in the meantime, what does that process look like for us as Americans and humanity? So thank you for reminding me of that and our audience. This week, uh, I want to focus on your lived experiences as a white male. And to set that up, last week, the conversation with my allies and action crew, we were exploring the concept of privilege and what privilege each of us on the crew have and how we use our privilege to bless and benefit others. So, fast forward to today, I want to focus on your lived experience as a white man. What privilege do you identify with the most and how you use it to benefit and bless others?
You know what's strange and interesting is that I grew up in LA County. I went to LA Unified for the majority of my education. Um, I didn't, I don't know when I first thought about that I was privileged because of the color of my skin.
Mhm.
It was just, I couldn't tell you. It wasn't a long time ago. I mean, it was probably more recent than not.
So, is that because you grew up in a community that was mainly white and you didn't think about it, or why do you suppose that was?
I mean, I no, I grew up in a pretty diverse community. I mean, we had African Americans on the street, Asians, Hawaiians. I mean, it was. I'm the youngest of. I have three older sisters, and their friends were always around, and I didn't. I never really thought of it that way. They were
Hmm.
people just like myself.
Yeah. What was the common feeling about race in America at that time? Do you remember what it was like for you growing up?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I would have to say TV obviously played an influence in.
Hmm.
I can remember growing up watching movies on TV about the civil rights movement, and that would probably is the beginning of prompting questions. My parents are both farmers. They came from New England. They settled in Southern California where I was born. Um, but yeah, I don't. I would have to say that was first introduced there. Now, I did grow up in a Mormon home. At that time, the Mormon church was predominantly white, but
Hmm.
it's not like race was preached from the pulpit.
Hmm.
But as I grew up in the church, more and more ethnicities were coming in, and I thought that was kind of cool. But yeah, I would have to say it would be Hollywood bringing it to the TV is when
Hmm.
the concept of race first started, and I guess the issues of race was first put into my head.
Was there any particular show? When I think about Hollywood, I think about All in the Family, where everyone, they called Archie Bunker America's favorite bigot because he put stuff out there and kept it real. We're talking about real conversations.
Yeah.
So in terms of shaping how we saw race relations, there was Archie Bunker. Then of course there was his nemesis George Jefferson, the other side, right? And the fact that Archie was this, everyman, but he had problems with different races. But then you've got George Jefferson who made it. He's got money, but he's still got problems with other races.
Right.
We think about Maud. We think about Good Times.
Mhm.
Are those some of the shows that you're thinking maybe had some influence on you, even subconsciously?
I'm sure subconsciously, and I remember, I believe it was the Archie Bunker show. He's the guy that sat in the recliner, right?
All in the Family,
All
correct?
in the Family.
Yep.
And I remember him using the N word, and this was on
Oh,
TV,
yeah.
and I can remember having a conversation with my parents about that. Now,
Mhm.
my father was more. I don't ever remember my father showing any bit of racism whatsoever, ever. My mother, on the other hand, would make reference to color. And so I think because of that conflict that it wasn't really discussed openly in the house to keep the
Mhm.
peace.
Yeah.
But I remember making a comment about his language and my father shutting it down and my mother snickering or something. But other than that, now I grew up, I love the Jeffersons, Welcome Back, Cotter.
Mhm.
Those were good shows too.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think I ever put two and two together outside All in the Family of race playing a role.
Mhm. I asked the question because we're shaped by what we're exposed to, in the media, in society. And unless we're raised to see things a certain way, if the discussions don't happen in the home, and it sounds like they didn't happen in your home, then people are kind of left to their own devices according to how they're conditioned by the media.
Right.
Um, Someone who doesn't know anyone black might assume that by watching Good Times, everybody black lives in the projects, or by watching the Jeffersons, maybe everybody black, has money. Now, fast forward to the Cosby Show, prison situation aside, that was my lived experience of growing up with professional parents who met in college. They raised us to go to school. I mean, even down to the scene where Denise is trying to make a shirt for Theo and one arm is a little bit longer. So my brother tells me, and perhaps it was a memory that I've since blocked, but he said, "Remember when you tried to make me a shirt and it kind of turned out like that?" I mean, that was our lived experience. So when people don't have these discussions at home, they're kind of left to their own devices, and how society presents things to shape their viewpoint. Do you think that might have been true in the case of maybe some of your white male friends?
I think it was, but I was fortunate enough. I want to say we moved to this street when I was 6 or 7. And my first best friend, as we go through best friends as children, was Argentinian. His parents didn't speak English. His father ran a gardening service. His mother stayed at home. They lived in a bigger, nicer house than we did. And, but that was Alex. And we hung out, and he was Hispanic looking, Argentinian. He was Ponch, and I was John, riding our bikes up and down the street playing chips.
Chips.
And then a buddy named Robbie moved into the street, whose mother was white, his father was African American. Um, his father was also deaf.
Mm.
So it was more about learning sign language so I could communicate with him about how I liked my oatmeal in the morning when I would spend the night over there.
Wow.
And I honestly, living on that street, I didn't have a white friend my age. They were all older or much younger than I was. So I want to say I'm kind of fortunate for that, because I wasn't surrounded by white children growing up where there was this give and take or pull back and forth. Um, and then going to high school, now I moved to Torrance for high school, which was predominantly white. And I, now that I think of that, that was the first time where race really, I remember there being a lawsuit. The federal government sued the city of Torrance because they had 0 black police officers.
Wow.
And the Fed coming in saying, look, we need some diversity here or we're going to, take over.
Mm.
Um, predominantly white, um, predominantly white high school. Probably definitely more Asian than any other race
Mhm.
or culture. Um, but then after high school, I joined the Marine Corps, where it was this. I, that was an eye opener for me. I remember our first, if you want to call it a hike on the beach in Marine Corps boot camp, and people amazed. The first time they ever saw the beach was in boot camp. So not a great experience for them, but they're seeing the ocean for the first time. And I think that that experience helped mold me as well. Yeah, I might be white living in California, but there's whites that have it better and worse coming from all over this country. And now we're all together learning from one another. And honestly, in the Marine Corps is the first time I ever saw a Ku Klux Klan membership card from a fellow.
What?
And so you have that coming into it, as well as being surrounded by every race.
Now, I find that interesting. I was gonna go another direction, but I want to hear some more about this story. You know I do. So tell me about your interactions with this person.
Well, I mean, when I judge people for who they are and how they handle themselves, and those are the people I chose to hang around with, regardless in life, still today. And I try to surround myself by people who are much smarter than me because I want to learn and grow more rapidly than I could by not hanging out with people smarter than myself.
Okay.
And when I learned that, I'm like, oh, wow, that's interesting. And separation started, you know? Um, but you had cliques in the Marine Corps, just like you have cliques everywhere. You know, I remember a story. It must have been the 70s when there was actually a race war on Camp Pendleton, 52 area. We called it the Grinder, big parade deck. And it was white on one side and African American on the other side. And they went at it. And I mean, base shut down, whole 9 yards. But for me, that was history. I was there in late 89, 90s, and that was history. Um, but yeah, you find all types of people, and you know, you kind of find your clique of like-minded people that you know have the same aspirations in life, whether it be in the Marine Corps or after the Marine Corps. And that's kind of who I gravitated to. And those people, we're all still good friends. We still socialize, we still call each other. And you know, the gentleman with the membership card, I no clue what happened to him once we left Alaska. We were stationed together for a year or so.
And the crew that you still keep in touch with, are they pretty diverse?
um you know, it's funny you say that. So Latimer, I shouldn't say last names, but he's white, lives in Utah. um Brent is white, lives in Oklahoma now, I believe. um O'Neill is African American in Texas. Dempsey's African American. I'm not sure where he's residing. So 50-50 split,
Yeah.
which I never really thought about it until you asked the question. I had to do the math.
Hmm. So let me shift gears really quickly. Last month, you were helping me shoot content for an online tutorial that I'm developing. And when it was over, you jokingly said, I've been a racist. And I know you were teasing, but do you remember what even prompted that comment? Let's explore that for a minute.
You know, I think it was when you were talking about how people were verbalizing what they presumed in their head.
Mm-hmm.
And again, going back to judging people for their actions
Mm-hmm.
is one of those things. And not that when I see somebody of color doing something I don't agree with, that I immediately go to race. It's just, I can't believe people are acting that way. But when I believe it was a story you told about the vehicle you were driving, and the person you were with was a white male and presumed your husband had a good job.
Yes.
And
Oh, and he assumed that my husband had to be white.
right,
That was the
right,
story.
right. See, and I went to job. I didn't even go to race.
Mhm.
But I think that just brought back, you know, presumptions and, you know, stereotypes. And yes, I I do believe it's bad to stereotype, but I also believe there are stereotypes for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Um, People are people, and again, if I saw somebody that I thought, oh wow, that's just probably not a good person, and let me back that up by justifying that statement. If I saw a Hispanic male with a bunch of face tattoos, the white t-shirt, the creased khaki, I'm like, okay, yeah, we're gonna make a judgment in our head that that's probably somebody that involves themselves into gang activities, gang behaviors. That's the stereotype, and Hollywood helps put that on us. However, I'm still going to walk up to him as a human being and say hi and introduce myself and see what they're about,
Mm-hmm.
because people make mistakes in the past, people change, people grow, and I'm not going to okay, I will judge the book by the cover because I made that thought. And that's when I said, wow, I've been a racist, because I have those thoughts, but it doesn't stop me from engaging and learning for myself so I can make an educated decision and not just a decision based on appearance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So this is a good place to mention that we all have biases. If
Mhm.
you've got a brain, you've got bias. And whether those biases were formed based on what we were taught in the home, or whether those biases are formed based on how we've been conditioned by the media to view people, it's only when we experience people that we can set those biases aside.
Right.
So back to the original story that you said I told that got you, to thinking, have I been racist? The story that I was telling was about a time where I was walking across the parking lot with a colleague of mine who happened to be white. He was a sales rep and I was his customer service rep. And we stopped at my car, which happened to be a Mercedes. And the first thing out of his mouth wasn't even, "Oh, what a nice car." He said, "Oh, is your husband white?" And so the assumption was that I had to be married to a white guy in order to afford a nice car. And a better question would have been, now let's put aside the fact that I could have afforded a car without having a husband. The better question would have been, "Oh, what does your husband do for a living?" And I could have said, "Oh, he's a sales rep just like you are." And he could have said, "Oh, let's all go out and have dinner sometime."
Right.
Race wouldn't even have to come into it. The assumption that I had to be married to a white guy to have a Mercedes would
Right.
not even have entered the picture. And again, that goes back to biases and the fact that we all have them. It's whether or not we're aware of them. And once we become aware of them, what we decide to do about them. So then let me ask you this. In the few short months that we've been working together, I want you to share with me a few aha moments that you've had while listening to the content and the context of my monthly monologues.
And I think we briefly discussed this, and I remember you saying you grew up learning to swim. And one of the stereotypes I grew up with were African Americans couldn't swim. And then I go to the Marine Corps, and O'Neill, who we still talk, um, but African American couldn't swim. And we were Marines. We went to the pool at least every year and we did a swim qualification. And he would stand on this 40-foot tower and he would look at us. He's like, "You guys got me, right?" Like, "Yeah, O'Neill, we got you." And this guy would jump off of this 40-foot tower into a swimming pool, knowing he couldn't swim, but knowing we had him. And we were going to jump in the pool once the lifeguard told us we could go, and we would bring him up to the surface so he could breathe and live. Um, but back then it was, yeah, we ribbed him about not being able to swim. And I honestly think I did it more from the stereo mindset, that stereotype than anything else. And it reinforced my stereotype, but we had other African Americans that could outswim me.
Mm-hmm,
So that stereotype broke at that point.
mm-hmm,
Um, it's it is it's interesting to me, and I think I love working with you because you put your content out there in a very non-confrontational manner, and in a manner that's easily absorbed and that makes people think. And that's you are the creator, that the type of creator that I love working with, because you make people think. And when we think about how we grew up, and how we behave, and more importantly, how others can perceive our behaviors, um, that's when we grow. That's when we truly can grow as a human being for ourselves. And that's so important because I mean, I have a daughter who is a much better human being than I am. Um, and I can't take all the credit. It was truly, back to the old saying, it takes a village to raise a child. We were always around family, and we were always around. I mean, I had a really good friend, African American, that lived in Compton, and I was the token white boy at all the barbecues. But it was, and they would rib me, and now I'm on the reverse side of that coin, and they would talk crap about, oh, you can't play dominoes, come over here, we're going to embarrass you, and I could hold my own, and that kind of amazed them.
Yes.
And thinking back on that now is what you just said.
Mhm.
They even have biases. I
Mhm.
remember a conversation of how us white people were all serial killers, and there's never been a black serial killer, and closed-minded thought. But not 5 years later, that case broke in LA where there's an African American serial killer. I go
Yeah.
back to the next barbecue and I'm like, what? But being around that and exposing my daughter to that crowd and that group, um, is, I mean, living it is one thing, but the way you teach opened my mind up to, oh, everybody has biases, you know? And I think that's what I take away from your content the most. And it's okay to have a bias. It's not okay to act out. It's not okay to verbalize every thought, and nobody should. Um, but that's what I take away from your content the most. You've helped me grow as a human being.
Oh, thank you. That is a very high compliment. It is my goal to use my voice to just raise awareness in people, just 1%. And, I'm still new to this game. So to hear you give me those words of encouragement and affirmation mean a lot because I know you've been doing this for a while. And I am very intentional about making sure that my content is not offensive, but is presented in a way that piques people's curiosity and causes them to search within themselves, which is something we all need to do. We all need to continue growing. And just recently, I have coined, I guess, a catchphrase for myself when I'm presenting this kind of content. And it's very simple. Do I want to be right or do I want to be received? I can be right in my content all day long, but if I don't deliver it in a way that doesn't make people feel shamed and blamed, if I don't deliver it in a way that encourages people to know better so that they can grow better and then do better, it does me no good to be right.
Right.
But if I'm received, that means that I have to be very, very conscientious in meeting people where they are. And in two podcasts ago, where I was recording a subtle awakening, I used the example of figuratively waking people with a sledgehammer with critical race theory, or waking people with an alarm clock in a way that instead of being mad about being woke, critical race theory, I'm wondering what it was that just woke me, the alarm clock that sometimes we subconsciously hear until we're fully awake and then we realize, oh, the alarm clock is going off. That's the kind of way that I choose to wake people. Because if you wake people suddenly, they're going to be ready for a fight. But if you wake people gently, they're really going to look around and go, what was it that just woke me? Let me investigate this. Is it a sound that I heard? Is it a nudge that I thought I felt? And that's my approach. And I know that perhaps some of my contemporaries might think that I soft pedal the message of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. But again, my focus is on belonging. And if I don't deliver a message in a way that makes everyone feel like they belong in the conversation of self discovery, then I've not reached my goal. So I want to thank you for helping me find my voice. When you and I first met, I was actually the guest on the Dale Carnegie 411 on leadership with Steve Thomas. And I want you to tell me what you thought about that show and what made you want to talk to me because afterwards you and I spoke for about an hour.
I think it was that delivery. You wanted to be received. And this was back in a time when there was still a lot of racial tension going
Mhm.
on in the streets. And it was refreshing to me to hear you speak, being African American, in the manner in which you were, because everybody else was shouting, or everybody else at that point in time was that alarm clock. And I don't want to say I'm smart enough. I kind of sit back and I see what's going on. And a lot of people were running their mouths about this is just an excuse to loot
Yeah.
and burn. And, you know, I no, it wasn't. I think what was being said at the time needs to be said. And there still needs to be a lot of work done within our policing system, our justice system, our prison system when it comes to race. And I think that the people that jumped on that bandwagon to do harm and to break glass and steal product, um, they're just opportunists. And it really made me happy to see protesters, legitimate protesters, attempt to stop them and protect that property.
Mhm.
And that takes us back to what we talked about when we first opened, people helping people,
Mhm.
you know? And it's like running a business isn't easy,
Mm-mm.
it isn't hard. And when you invest so much money in inventory and it is taken from you,
Mhm.
even if you're insured,
Right.
that doesn't mean you want to open a store in that community and try to run a business, because in their mindset it was the community who hurt them.
Yeah.
And that's not always the case. But we see things like food deserts in underserved communities, to where their choices for fresh anything are miles away. And
Mhm.
it's sad that that 10%, and the 10% is a Marine Corps thing. There's always that 10%, the guy that's asking too many questions in class, stopping us from going and having fun, or there's always that 10%. um Ruin it for a lot of people. And I think that the message could have been better understood and received by the world at whole if all this craziness wasn't going on with the looting. And I think because of the time in which we spoke and what was going on in the world and just the manner in which you delivered your content, it was like, okay, this is, I don't even want to say a happy medium. You and your message and the manner in which you deliver it is what needs to be out front, because you do want to be received. And I think more people want to understand why, more so than be beat over the head with now.
Yes. I love the way you just put that. And that really is the desire of my heart. When I think about why I'm in the diversity, inclusion, and belonging space. And if someone had told me 5 years ago I'd be doing this for a living, I'd be like, "Are you crazy? Do you know how volatile those conversations can get?" So part of my approach, honestly, is to keep myself safe, because if you don't approach people in a way that makes them comfortable to even have the discussion, it can go sideways really bad, which means it can be dangerous for me. It can be dangerous for the person I'm talking to. It can be dangerous for the other 30 people in the room when I'm on site with a client. But this is my form of laboring for justice as a labor of love. So I want to know how you situate yourself as a co-laborer with me, because not only are you my engineer, you're my thought partner, you're someone who I now consider a friend. And while you're thinking about the answer to that question, I just want to share that sometimes in this work, we are so busy trying to be inclusive that we inadvertently exclude the voice of some people, and in particular, the white males. I've had several conversations with white males who've said to me, "I'm on board with diversity, inclusion, belonging. I want to get on the bus, but I'm going to go to the back of the bus because the last thing I want is in my enthusiasm to want to drive the bus on occasion. I don't want to hear, there goes the white guy again trying to run everything." And so the conversation that I have sometimes, in particular with white males, is I'm not sure anybody wants to hear my voice. I'm not sure anybody values my voice. I'm not sure anybody thinks that I have a voice that I want to share. Actually, I'm still trying to find my voice. Dr. Nita, can you help me? And so when I ask how you situate yourself as a co-laborer with me, it's from the standpoint that I absolutely recognize that everybody's voice is valuable. And right now, the voice of the white male might feel like they're out in the wilderness and nobody cares. But when I say I value every voice, I mean I value every voice.
You know, I got into this because there are so many people out there that have value that they could tell via a story or an interview. And I kind of wanted to help facilitate that. And at Sitch Radio, we are here to help you, other people, tell their story and not deal with all the tech and the craziness of ever changing technology. Um, but yes, I always felt excluded when it came to race and tension. It's I was the white man. Nobody wanted to hear from me.
Yeah.
And when people get to know me, they're gonna they're gonna know that yeah, maybe I am quiet about it outside my circle. But I mean, I've always encouraged my daughter, if you see an injustice, you and have a moral conviction, it's your obligation to stand up. And she participated in some of these protests in LA, and it's pins and needles. And I have that talk with her. You know, it's okay to go out and use your voice and exercise your rights to help fight injustice. But once a line is crossed and tear gas comes out, it's time for you to remove yourself from that situation safely. And you have an exit strategy, and you have a secondary exit strategy, and you have a tertiary exit strategy, because the fog of war, as we coined it in the Marine Corps, you just can't. If you don't have a plan, you're not going to be able to navigate safely.
Mm-hmm.
And she participated in several, and terrifies me. I'm sitting at home, you know, and I know she's putting herself in harm's way, but it also made me very proud that she's standing up for what she feels is right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I say she's a much better human than I am. One of the reasons. But it's those stories. If people get to know me, they're going to understand that I am for police reform. I am for getting rid of qualified immunity. And unfortunately, it's that 10% that are wearing a badge that are ruining it for everybody else. Um, if a police department can't police itself, it's got no business policing a community.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got a friend who was a former Marine, multiple combat tours, both battles of Fallujah, just a remarkable warrior. Got out of the Marine Corps, joined a police department. He could have used favor of family to work for a department that his father was actually the chief of, and he said, "No, I need to earn my own way," and went to work for a department, and was partnered with a gentleman who was heavy-handed. And he pulled him outside and said, "Look, we don't violate our citizens' rights, and we're here to police the community, not beat the community into submission."
Right.
And it was yeah, lip service. It happened a second time, and he said, "Look, we've talked once, we're talking again. Third time, I'm not talking to you, I'm writing it." And it happened a third time, and now this officer was removed from patrol for reporting a fellow officer that was heavy-handed, and put on smoking duty around the city's mall, where it was his job to write tickets for people smoking, because you can no longer smoke in that city on public property. And to the point to where he left policing. And it's problems like that that do need to be fixed. And I mean, I have these opinions, and I speak out, and I use my rights to write my letters to my representatives and be, you know, civically responsible, and do what I feel is right, because it's not just for me and my community, it's for my daughter and, you know, her children one day, and their children one day. And if we're not leaving this city, county, state, country, earth 2% better than it was when we found it, it's downhill. It's
Yeah.
downhill. So that's me in a nutshell. I'm gonna say hi to everybody, and give everybody a chance to not necessarily prove themselves to me, but allow me to get a better understanding of them. And I'm gonna fight for what I believe in as well, against the grain or not.
And that's one of the many qualities that I really admire about you, Brian. You just what they call salt of the earth guy. I mean, to sit down, when we very first met, what I thought was going to be a 10-minute conversation went an hour
Yeah.
because we just enjoy one another's company. We enjoy one another's thought processes. And what I really appreciate about you in your profession is the fact that you have a desire to invite diverse voices to have time at the mic, so to speak.
Yeah.
And to me, I see that as laboring for justice as a form of labor of love. How do you see the work that you do?
Yeah, I appreciate story. I remember sitting around a campfire as a child, and that storytelling was just I don't know. To this day, I still sit around a campfire when I do get out and just reminisce on those times. But story is so powerful,
Mm.
and there are, I mean, more stories than I can count. And I think a lot of causes go unrecognized because people aren't telling their story. I worked feverishly with a young lady. She was 22, 23 ish when I met her, who was brought to this country as a refugee from Afghanistan after her entire village was destroyed. She was one of the few that survived. And she was brought here when she was 14 and placed into the system. Excuse me. And had to learn English, had to learn what America was about, how to be American, how to fit in, how, while grieving the loss of her family, while dealing with being in a new place, and college graduate, great job, giving back to the community. And I'm like, wow, this, talk about a story of empowerment. And it still haunts me that I couldn't get her on the mic, you
Mm.
know? And it's those stories, especially for young women, in growing up. I I never wanted a son because I thought I'd be in jail for killing it because I'm just going to be too hard on a boy. Being blessed with a daughter was perfect. But yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of concerns for her navigating her way through this life. And, she's college graduate. She's working on her master's degree. She works in healthcare. She's a remarkable individual, but I still worry about her every day, because she is in a world that's broken, in an America that's broken, and it needs to be fixed. And we're not going to fix it overnight, but we've got to start again 2% better,
Mhm.
2% better,
I'm curious, why are you so concerned about your daughter?
because that's my job.
Yeah.
That's my job. I'd lay down my life for her right now.
Mm.
I my parents worked hard to make sure we had it better than they did. I didn't have to. I don't want to say I didn't have to, because there's nothing wrong with growing up farming, but I didn't have the laborious tasks that they did before they could even go to school.
Mm.
Um, so I feel they allowed us that. And it was always my hope that I would be able to provide my offspring a better life than I had, and instill in them that it's their job to make sure their offspring have it better than they did. And um, I mean, I talked about growing up with three older sisters. I have one natural sister who's my oldest. Um, I have a sister who's adopted. My parents brought her home when she was 2 days old. And
Oh.
I have a foster sister who came to live with us when she was 16. So I must have been, I don't know, 10, 11. Um, and I don't want to say I ever noticed them having it harder growing up other than mother's justice. My
Mm-hmm.
mother was extremely harder on them than she was me. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know. When my dad left for work, I was man of the house and you take care of your sisters, and that was just always ingrained in me. But having my own daughter now, yeah, I worry about her. I raised her to be adventurous and to have her own mind and to stand up for what's right, which is a double edged sword.
Mm-hmm.
If she sees injustice in a public place, it might not be the safest place to stand up for it, but she will, and I know that. And I guess that concerns me a little bit, but yeah, it's my little girl.
Yeah.
Have you met her
Um,
yet, Doctor?
I'm sorry.
Have you met her yet?
I have not met her yet. When are you going to introduce us?
Well, she comes into the studio quite a bit, so
Does she?
I'm sure she'll pop in one day when you're here.
Okay.
Yeah.
You had me laughing when you said if you ever had a son, you were afraid you'd kill him because you'd just be so hard on him. And my husband and I were not blessed to have children, but I've also often wondered if that wasn't because I would have been so hard on my kids that they either would have ran away or I'd have caught a case, as they say. Because John and Mary Polite, uh, they did not play. You know, they were college educated. They expected you to be college educated. They were upstanding citizens. They raised you to be upstanding citizens. And they met in Georgia. And so to this day, the adults that I grew up in my church with, it's still Mr. This and Miss That. Oh no, no, call me Patty. Oh no, you are Mrs. So and so because that's the way I was raised, right?
Yeah.
Dr. Anita is gonna call you Mrs. So and so. And so when we think about our backgrounds, I think we have a lot more in common than people might assume if they were to just see us on the street. And that's another reason why I have just so enjoyed the cultivation of our relationship on so many different levels. Before we go, what else do you want to share with our audience about what you've discovered about yourself through our partnership?
It's okay to be it's okay to have a bias, and it's not okay to always act out,
Hmm.
which I don't think I do, but understanding your own weakness is the only way you're going to make yourself stronger, better, faster.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I think that's probably my biggest takeaway, that it's okay, and do better. 2%.
Yeah. It's okay to be human. We
Yeah.
all have bias. To your
Yep.
point, it's a matter of when we make that discovery about that bias, what are we going to do to improve even a little bit every day because it all adds up.
Well, and it's funny because I have met a lot of people in this world that are, we'll just say, not white, that are just phenomenal individuals, educated, they give back, they truly care. And on the flip side of that coin, not so much. And it's every race, it's every religion, it's every culture. There's always going to be, back to that 10% of knuckleheads, and we just have to surround ourselves with the right crowd and people
Mhm.
that are better than ourselves, and we'll get there. We'll get there.
Brian, thank you for joining me this morning. Of all of my segments in my programming, and they're all wonderful. I think I enjoy lived experiences the most because, to your point, I get a chance to hear people's stories.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much for sharing your story with me. And I am just so excited about our new project. I'm not going to say anything about it just yet because it's still in development, but I can't wait till we come out with our new project. And I just want to thank you for encouraging me to share my voice. I want to thank you for supporting me in developing my voice as a podcaster. And I just love you, my friend. I just think you're all that. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Likewise, doctor, you're a wonderful human being, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Brian. Well, audience, until next week, I hope you think about your own lived experiences and how you can take those experiences and shape them into a story that's going to impact someone else. That's all I want you to think about today. That's your 1%. And until next time, this is Dr. Anita reminding you to stay blessed and keep it real.